First of all, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jackie Yurkowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska United Methodist Foundation, and I am just so happy that you are all with us today. On the call today, we also have Reverend Dr. Matt Fowler. He's our Director of Stewardship, and he's busy clicking and letting everybody in, so you'll hear from him a little bit later. And then we also have several board members. So thank you. Matt, you just muted me. That was...
Oops.
So yesterday, Matt and I were practicing, and I kept telling him I couldn't hear him, and I was muting him and unmuting him. I deserve that. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. So one of the things we love here at the foundation about our jobs is just the ability to connect with all of you. And this kind of stuff really just brings joy to us and makes us we love it. So thank you again so much. We're continuing to work forward and trying to find ways to serve all of you during this unusual time. And we just appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Like Matt said, we had close to 80 people register for this session. And you know, that shows that the topic is necessary, but it also shows the love and respect we have for Reverend Dr. Charlotte Abrams. So with that, I'm going to read a short bio, and many of you know her, but there may be things in here that you don't know. Reverend Abrams is the daughter of the late Fred and Pauline Magruder. In 1989, she graduated with a Master's of Divinity from St. Paul's School of Theology in Kansas City. She was the first African-American woman to become an ordained elder in the former Nebraska Conference of the United Methodist Church, and received an honorary doctorate from Nebraska Wesleyan University in Lincoln. She has pastored a variety of congregations, both large and small, African American, European American, and multicultural congregations. In retirement, and I should use quotes, in retirement, she serves as the Christian Education Director at Living Hope, a mission congregation in Northeast Omaha. Charlotte has served on general and jurisdictional conference delegations, numerous national, regional, district, and community boards. She has been a part of Omaha Together One Community, a community organizing effort, and the District Mission Agency since their inception. She is an active mentor to several youth and young adults. Charlotte has been married to her husband, Terry Abrams, for 51 years. They enjoy spending time with their 3 grown children, 4 grandchildren, new great-grandchild, and extended family. When she has time to pursue them, her hobbies are genealogy, cooking, and making picture collages. I am so happy that she made time to be with us today. We are so thankful, Charlotte. Before I turn it over to you, I ask that each of you just try to keep yourself muted as much as possible during this time. You can also click on the speaker view, allows Charlotte to be front and center. Both of those buttons, the mute and the speaker view, are on the top right-hand corner of your screen. And then if you have any questions, you know, as this moves along, I think what we'll probably do is ask first that you type your questions into the chat window, and then Matt or myself will try to get those questions out there. But Charlotte, you can feel free to move through with discussions as you think it works best. But if you do have questions that you would like to type, Matt and I will be watching for those. So with that, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And it's so good to see so many friends. I see Chad has joined us and Lauren Mullins and others, and I'm so glad to see you all. So this is really a discussion among friends. And I want to thank the foundation for inviting me to be a part of this Lunch and Learn. And it's just so good for us clergy and lay together to talk about this important conversation. The fact that we have so many folks on the Zoom just tells me that it's a topic that a conversation and some learning and some discussion we need to have. And I am going to share from my heart, but also share 3 reference articles that support some of what I was already thinking. You know how we do that. And some things that inspired me to think a little more deeply about the topic of navigating difficult conversations. You see those either on the webpage later, and I think Matt has the ability to email them to you. So now I want you to know I've tried to choose my words carefully, and some of the words are friendly and not so friendly. And I want to see if you catch some of those and the differences as we go along. And hopefully you can let me know, because I'm a learner along with you. I want you to let me know how the phraseology, how the topics hit your spirit, what they did to your heart. And of course, I mean, looking around at this group gathered, we have folks who have led and been a part of difficult conversations, and some who will yet be a part of another difficult conversation our church will have later on this year. And so I want us to, during the second half, also depend upon and glean from and learn from all of the knowledge and the wisdom we have gathered here today. And of course, you know, it is no secret that we've got a host of difficult issues and difficult topics, hot button topics, explosive subjects to talk about. And perhaps you've already been a part of some individual groups, or you've had individual conversations that have been difficult in nature and in subject matter. And as I alluded to earlier, certainly with General Conference and then the subsequent annual conferences and the church conferences we'll have later on this year, in the aftermath of the decisions that will be made at General Conference, there's going to be discussions to be had, responses to be shaped, decisions to be made, and policies to be determined. So yeah, I mean, we have to buckle up. We're in for a time of navigating some very difficult conversations. And as usual, as I always recommend, we start and we bathe and we end with prayer. So let's pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Well, it was the annual conference session in the late 1990s, and Bishop Joel Martinez had invited Kent Millard to be present to help the annual conference navigate a difficult discussion on the church and homosexuality. Covenant services for one lesbian couple and one gay couple had been performed by the Reverend Jimmy Creech. Church trials had occurred, and folks on all sides of the issue had some strong opinions. As we gathered in O'Donnell Auditorium on the campus of Nebraska Wesleyan, I think tension was a little high. I mean, some of you were at that particular conference, and those of you in Kansas, you may have been doing your own thing. But what I remember about the opening plenary with Reverend Millard was that he, as he approached the topic of disagreements over tough issues and the fact that those disagreements could destroy or tear relationships apart, I remember his words. He said, whenever we face a tough issue with friends, colleagues, co-workers, and our family, the issue is not the issue. The issue is the relationship. Right after he said that and spoke with us and gave us directions, some ushers passed out about 4 or 5 pieces of index cards, really, of different colors. And each different color represented a different stance on the view of homosexuality in the church. And we were instructed that we were at a certain point to lift our cards up and then to find someone who had a different color card than we had. And we were to engage in that person, with that person in a conversation. The conversation was first and foremost to be a time of sharing stories about ourselves, talking about our family, getting to know one another before we began in any way talking about the difficult conversation before us. And I don't know how it happened. I don't know if our eyes locked when we held up our cards and we could see that we had, different colors. But a clergy colleague of mine from across the room caught my eye and I caught his, and he came towards me and we began to sit down and talk. We shared all kinds of things for the time that was allotted. We were hearing each other out. We were listening closely and carefully to what was on that person's mind and how they shared their story. And I'll say a little bit more about that. But I want to say that if we want to go with first, second, and third, and 1, 2, 3s, one of the first things that's important as we consider navigating difficult conversations is to set the right environment for those congregations in which those conversations will occur. And that's what Reverend Millard did. He created an environment where the conversation could happen, hopefully without us wounding one another. Now, Renee Ambry, in an article I read, and it's called 8 Ways to Wade into the Water of Difficult Conversations in the Church, she suggested a critical part of creating the environment in which we can have those conversations is to first establish safe space. Space to allow people to be wrong, or to get the language wrong, or to disagree, even to disagree with us as presenters, lay and clergy, to say what they're thinking and feeling without fear of judgment, and to know more than anything that we have and we are in a safe space to begin our work together. And I support what she is saying. However, I want to make the point that does not mean that anything goes. Part of creating a safe space is setting boundaries. Boundaries need to be set and agreed upon up front. And that's true of group conversations and one-on-one conversations. And when we're in a one-on-one conversation, we can say something like, well, I'm open to having this conversation as long as, and then lay out what we feel should be a boundary. And then also, and then ask them, do you agree? And then ask them about their boundaries, ask them about their expectations. Ambre is clear, and I am equally clear that those boundaries need to include the fact that no one gets a pass on being unkind, on using slurs, insulting, or demeaning language. She says a weaponized mouth. We know what she's talking about, don't we? A weaponized mouth increases trauma and does not lead to peace. Unrighteous anger, we talk about righteous and unrighteous anger. Well, unrighteous anger, disgust, and hate are meant to hurt and destroy another human person, another person's spirit. Such emotions subvert any effort to deeper conversation with the Holy Spirit, within ourselves, and with each other. Now, let me say now that doesn't mean that we don't allow for passion and impassionate speeches, or, because, we'll be engaged with persons who, or we may be persons who have experienced racial injustice, sexual harassment, rape, bullying, betrayal, character assassination. There'll be wounded persons, we might be one of them, in the midst of our conversations. And so passions will come out, and that's okay. Tears will happen, and that's okay. It sometimes we'll be the ones to be crying. But in the midst of that, no one gets a pass to be unkind. And we have to find a way to call and deal with that kind of behavior. And the way we deal with it is setting those expectations up front. Well, that day in Old Donald Auditorium, as we were preparing to engage in the conversation with someone who felt differently on this particular issue than we did, I noticed one of my clergy brothers, and I love him to this day, but I noticed one clergy brother get up and walk out of the auditorium. Now, I was assuming he walked out, not to go to the restroom. I believe he walked out because he was not ready to have that conversation. And in speculating about that, I am reminded of this story. I love to share stories. And it's a story of a young seminarian who was assigned to shadow a pastor who was doing some counseling with a couple who were at odds with each other. Now, as the pastor counseled with the couple, he listened, and this happened to be a man and a woman. He listened to the woman, and she shared her side of the events rather passionately. And the pastor looked at her and said, "Oh, you're right. You're also right." And then the gentleman, the husband, shared his view on the subject, and it was diametrically opposed to what the woman had said. And the pastor looked at the man when he got through talking and said, "You're right. You're also right." And this troubled the young seminarian. And so after the couple left, he said to the pastor, he said, I noticed that you told both of the people they were right, but they had opposite views of everything. They couldn't both be right, could they? And the pastor looked at the young seminarian and said, "You're right. You're also right." Now, I don't share that to say that we got to decide about right and wrong. I share that to say that, like that pastor, sometimes we might be shy about taking a stand. We're shy about it because we want to avoid conflict, I think. I mean, as I reflect on the reason why my colleague might have left that room, I realized that he just wasn't ready to have that conversation. He wasn't receptive or willing or able to reveal how he felt about that difficult issue. I mean, maybe he hadn't processed it himself. But the fact is, sometimes people will run away from difficult conversations. Sometimes we run away from difficult conversations. I don't know if I have any witnesses out there, but there's been a time. And we run away maybe because we're really not ready. But ready or not, here those difficult conversations come, especially for us in the church and any of us who navigate society and talk to anybody about what's going on in the world. So, in order to navigate difficult conversations, it is important, it is paramount that we do our homework first. Inner homework and outer homework. Now, it's a step, it's an ongoing step. You don't get a pass from doing homework. It's a precursor to any planned conversations we'll have. I mean, Stephanie's smiling, I'm sure. Those who are on general conference delegations and jurisdictional delegations, y'all got a lot of homework to do. And it is something that will aid unplanned conversations when they happen to take place, that homework. So first, let's talk about the inner homework. That includes figuring out our value system, our beliefs, that includes facing our own comfort level with conflict and disagreement. I mean, perhaps that's what Jesus was doing during that 40 days of temptation in the wilderness. I don't know. Perhaps he was affirming the values on which his ministry and on which he would stand. And he certainly dealt with conflict as the tempter kept coming at him and at him and at him. See, I believe that sometimes we're afraid of talking about difficult issues because we're afraid the conflict might fracture a relationship that we value. And so we shy away from discussing difficult issues one-on-one, and even, I might say sometimes especially in the church. Now, I'm sure you've heard that old adage, right? That there are at least two things we should not discuss when we get together in family groupings and when we're with friends or at work. And you know what they are. You can say them with me: politics and religion. Well, nowadays we know that there's way more than two things, right? The issue of Black Lives Matter. I mean, because we live, all our folks live in society. The issue of racism, the death of unarmed Black and brown men and women, the peaceful and the unpeaceful protests, and the response of authorities to those protests. Mask or not to mask when we're in public in terms of the coronavirus. NASCAR and the Confederate flag. The tearing down of some monuments that some hold dear and others do not. The political side of any issue, but especially our elections coming up. All those issues, and you could name some more, all of those issues are emotionally charged. There are issues happening in society on which people don't see eye to eye and perhaps never will. Now, I said, my pain doesn't seem okay. How am I doing, Matt? Are you all right?
Okay, that was fun. Give me 2 seconds to find her.
Okay, I'm back.
Welcome back.
I'm back. Well, are y'all back? Am I the only one that disappeared?
Yes, we're so glad you're back.
I'm back. Okay. Well, as I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted by the internet. You know, do we or should we weigh in on these matters? And how can we do that so it doesn't destroy relationships? Do we or should we weigh in on these matters with individuals or with groups? You know, should we in our congregations take stances and let our Judeo-Christian values inform the conversation and any subsequent action we might take? Is the church a place where different opinions can exist and we still hold each other close and tight and accountable? Is the church a place where we can have difficult conversations? Or is the church a place where we avoid them at all costs? In the faces of the people on the nightly news, do we see that person in the parable of the Good Samaritan? You know, the one that was beat up and left bleeding on the other side of the road, the one who was in that ditch. Is the church in that parable Jesus told more like the religious leaders who passed by on the other side, passed by the wounded of the world in fear of disturbing the status quo? Or do we stop and attend the wounds of those in the society we say we love? Perhaps that inner work is the work the church needs to do as a group, and the work we need to do as individuals. So, as we prepare to engage in difficult conversations, it is crucial for us to be in touch with our own inner spirit. You know, what are your hot button topics? We got to know our hot button issues. We got to figure out our positions, our values. We got to know where we get our information from. And is that information even accurate? If it's the information on which we base our opinions. We got to know the biblical foundation on which we stand. We got to know if we're standing actually on a biblical foundation. As I said earlier, it's incumbent on us, first and foremost, to figure out our comfort level with conflict. We got to ask ourselves, at least I ask myself, how infected am I still by that people-pleasing disease? Because when you're a people pleaser, sometimes it makes it hard to take a stand. Am I right? I see Rebecca shaking her head. You know, some of us were enrolled in that club, right, Lori, early on. And that's a hard club to get out of, but we've got to be able to stand where God wants us to stand, and we'll stand where we feel God is calling us to stand. We've got some difficult conversations to be had. And again, sometimes it won't be in groups. Sometimes we won't be prepared. Sometimes people will catch us off guard, ambush us when we're not ready. If that happens, we can always say, well, you know, because a lot of people want to share. We can always say, thank you for your opinion. Perhaps we can talk about that later. Or some of you may have some ways that you've handled that. You know, you might say, you know, I'm not prepared to talk about that now. Let's find a time when we can. And then actually find that time. You know, it's so important to do our inner homework before we have to rely on it for these difficult conversations. But it's just as important to do that outer homework. It's just as important to educate ourselves on the issues. It's just as important to look at the issues not only from our standpoint and read the articles and listen to the people who agree with us, but we have to listen to all sides of the issue. Now that can be hard for some of us. Sometimes it's hard for me. It's hard for me when I approach conversations, sometimes with millennials. I'm gonna get some feedback on this, or with my son. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but I approach it as if it's gonna be a debate. I got a point to make. You know, I gotta win this. I gotta win them over. Rather than approaching it with a listening ear. You know, approaching it as a conversation where if I listen, I might learn something. We've got some difficult conversations. And the writer of an article called Time to Have the Difficult Conversation, it was published, part of it at least, on the General Board of Discipleship website. He says, really, it's best practice if we approach the difficult conversations as a curious listener versus a know-it-all expert. Now I know none of you all have ever considered yourself know-it-all experts, but I've got to say, there have been probably times when people have thought that about me. I don't know, at least my kids. Well, in her article, she says this is to build trust. To build trust, we invite everyone in the conversation to supersede the presumption of knowing the right answer. Instead, we encourage people to simply listen to each other without commentary. Now, Parker Palmer encourages a practice called the circle of trust. And some of you may know more about it than I do. I'm going to explore it. But he says in those conversations, there's no fixing, no saving, no advising, no setting each other straight. You know, the ground rules are simple. They're simple. Listen without being an expert. Respect the other person and go into that conversation as a curious listener. You know, if we learn to talk with honest candor, you know, about ourselves and issues in times of peace, excuse me, those skills will be available for us in time when we face challenging conversations. So, practice, practice, practice. Practice putting the principles either you've learned or you've read about or you want to learn about, practice putting them to use at work, at home. I mean, let them be a part of your approach to the different generations in your family, to your friends, to anybody when you have to talk about a difficult issue. Again, starting a difficult conversation means, as we did in O'Donnell Auditorium, it means starting with your own story first. You know, as leaders, they say we should know our own inner story and then lead others to discover their own inner story. In short, it teaches people how to start an honest, civil conversation about things that deeply matter in our lives. Not only that, it's important, they say, and I've read, to know who you're talking with, not as a combat strategy, but as a way of beginning with a common thread that ties you together. So as we begin thinking about how to navigate difficult conversations, we can begin by sizing up the relationship, you know? And when I say that, I mean, is the relationship wanting? Is it a good relationship? Is it one that's rocking? Is it one that's just around the edges? Knowing the group of people that we're going to talk to. What are their values? What's their interest? Someone else put it this way: strive to know your audience just as much as you know yourself. Well, you probably can't do that, but it can be close. But what's the goal of the conversation? Figure that out. Is it to listen? Is it to hear and be heard? Is it to change your mind? Is it to argue? You know, some folks just love to argue. I have some extended family members. I mean, that's their sport. They love to argue on any and every topic and try to draw you in. Well, that day in the O'Donnell Auditorium, it's like Mary Morose, who wrote an article. She wrote 3 formative practices for difficult conversations every church can learn. She suggests that we begin again, as I said before, with what we have in common. We're simply listening to each other's heart, not only about our lives, but on the issue. Listening again, though, doesn't mean that we have to agree with the other person, with what they say, with what they're thinking or feeling. It's simply acknowledging their perspective, their fears, even when we don't agree. Listening goes a long way to helping a person feel as if they've been heard. And sometimes that's the bottom line with many folks. And of course, it makes a difference whether we're talking one-on-one, whether that difficult conversation happens one-on-one, or if we're facilitating a group like this group. Renee Ambre says, when facilitating groups, and many of us do, people need to see our heart as they listen to us. More than expecting a presenter that has all the right answers, because none of us do. Or, know that we don't expect them to agree with everything that we say. People need to see our hearts in these difficult discussions. And even in our sermons, beloved, that's a note to those of us who preach. And like many others, I've been a part of some difficult conversations. I've preached some sermons on difficult issues and topics. And most of the time, I've been able to stay in relationship. Oh, I'd say about 99% of the time, been able to stay in relationship with the people I've been talking to and those who've been talking to me. We can have difficult conversations, even if at the end of that difficult conversation, it means we decide we have to part ways or disagree on certain things. We can have those difficult conversations. Finally, beloved, navigating difficult conversations, I believe, means knowing how and when to end those conversations. You know, conversations can start off well, but they can get heated along the way, and they can take a turn for the worse. I mean, it happened to Jesus, didn't it? He stood up in his hometown to preach his first sermon, that was in Luke 4, and it was going well. But Jesus, as old folks used to tell me, stopped preaching and went to meddling, at least in the opinion of that crowd. Jesus began to compliment the faith of some folks that crowd, the hometown crowd, considered outsiders. And the crowd got angry. Let's face it, a conversation can hit a sour note and elicit negative responses. And we know that sometimes we have people in our congregations, people in our families, or we might run into somebody who's just plain cantankerous. That's me a story. Story is told of a man who got up one morning in a foul mood. His wife wanted to make things better. So she said, "Dear, what would you like for breakfast?" And he said, "Well, fix me 2 eggs. I want 1 scrambled and 1 fried." So she went about her time and she fixed the eggs and she presented them on a plate to her husband. And she said, "Here's your breakfast." And he looked at the plate and he frowned up and she said, "Well, dear, what's wrong? You said you wanted 2 eggs, 1 scrambled and 1 fried. As he pushed the plate away, he said to her, "You scrambled the wrong egg." Sometimes we'll scramble the wrong egg, according to people. Jesus scrambled the wrong egg. And when people got angry and thought they could take Jesus and do what they wanted with him, do him harm, Jesus ended the discussion and walked away. There will be times, beloved, when we'll have to end the discussion, hopefully with a loving note, and walk away. Well, that day in the auditorium, as the conversation between my clergy friend and I came to an end, it ended on a positive note. My clergy brother said to me, he said, "You know, I'm moving from the conference, but Charlotte, would you mind if we kept in touch?" And I said to him, "You know what? I'd like that a lot. Let's keep in touch and keep building the relationship." Now, to our neglect, neither one of us did, but we left the door open. And sometimes that's all we can do, is leave the door open to the next conversation. So the last thing I want to leave you with is, when we have engaged in difficult conversations, after that, it's time to let go and let God. Let go and debrief. Debrief, you know, with your own inner spirit, debrief with God, debrief with others. Let go and let God, and trust that by the power of the Holy Spirit, God will still work on us and on those we've been in conversation with. God's not through with any of us yet. Let go and let God, and know that God will work on our hearts. If we're able to let go until the next conversation, we'll be more able to have that next conversation and navigate well through discussions and conversations that are difficult. Thanks be to God. Amen. So